So, hi David, how are you doing?
I'm good, Jenny. Thanks. Thank you.
Good. Down at the distillery there with a lovely looking setup and some nice evening light coming through.
Yeah, it's been a glorious day, but when we have days like this, we've got to start early because it's a little bit warm for the condensers. So it's been a bit of an early start for me this morning. Yeah.
Yeah. What time did you start this morning?
Well, I have to admit it was 5:30. So if I start to look a bit weary at the end of this, then you'll probably know why.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, well, we won't ask you too many questions, I don't think then. We'll just keep an eye out if you're just seeming to be relying on the whiskey a little bit too much.
I'll try not to.
Okay, great. So thanks to everyone who's joining so far. We're just going to chat a little bit whilst we wait for more people to join in, and then we'll get going good and proper. I hope you've been having a nice day and that you were able to have a sunny bank holiday weekend in kind of whatever guise your new normal currently looks like. So we've got a few more people joining. That's really nice now. And we've got a couple of comments coming in. Really nice. Oh, hi, Paul. Hopefully the video is started and that you're able to see us. I've got a little icon on the top of my screen saying that we've got a few more people joining. So that's really nice. So yeah, a few more seconds and then we'll get going.
That's not Paul Backhouse, is it?
It is Paul Backhouse.
Hello, Paul.
Brilliant. So yeah, so we've got people joining and lots of things happening. So to that end, we'll get started, I think. So welcome to Field to Bottle number 4. So every Wednesday at 6 o'clock, we do about half an hour or so talking about a different aspect of our field to bottle production process. We're sort of working in a semi-chronological order, but we're changing each week between the field and the actual hands-on process, and then the bottle, and talking about some of our releases and what we've been doing and actually what our whiskey tastes like. So this week we're on a field and a production week. So we're talking about malting and the wash, which are two of the bits that actually not that many people know about. It's the bit between the barley coming out of the field and being a grain to then running through the stills and becoming a whiskey good and proper. So it's a really crucial part, but it's not the most well known about. So it's a really nice one to be talking about today. So quick introductions to all of us here. So you've got David Thompson, sat on the right there at the distillery. He's our co-founder. Say hi.
Hi.
Super. And then you've got me. I'm Jenny Ashwood. I head up the marketing here at Spirit of Yorkshire. So today, David will be doing the majority of the talking, and I'll just be asking the questions, kind of keeping an eye on anything that you guys are saying in the comment section, and generally just kind of keeping things moving and running. So first things first, David. Like malt and barley isn't really a new thing for you, is it? It's not something that you just learned about when you started with the distillery. So talk a bit about your background. I'll turn my phone off too. That's embarrassing. And I'll talk a bit about your background and kind of on why this isn't a new subject for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I suppose it started because I got my first ever job on a farm. So just left school, didn't really know what to do with myself. So I had a friend who was a farmer, and he gave me a job. I ended up there for 3 years, would you believe? Did everything from livestock right the way through to crops and everything you can imagine on a farm. And that sort of grew my interest really in agriculture. And I went off to agricultural college and did a marketing course, and specifically a merchanting course. And what that means basically is, how do we buy and sell to farmers? So I did that for 3 years. Luckily, I got a job with a company that was just trying to break new ground in the East Yorkshire area, which was my home anyway. So back in, I think it was 85, oh my gosh, a long time ago, I first got my company car and off I went. And I had to break, as I say, new ground with farmers, which, let's say, are not the easiest people to work with, especially if you're a new boy on the block. So that was hard work. But gradually, I built a very successful career. And one of my major sort of crops, if you like, that I looked after and bought and sold was malting barley. So all those years ago, who would know? I'm now using that knowledge in the production of whiskey.
Yeah, and tell us about one of those particularly grumpy farmers that you used to work with.
Well, one of those particularly grumpy farmers was Tom Mellor. he was one of my very first customers, and I think it was probably 86, 87 when we started working with each other. And a little story here, Jen, which you've heard loads of times, but Tom, in his wisdom, said to me he was looking for a fly half to play for Bridlington, and if he wanted or if I wanted his fertilizer order, I would have to go and fill that place. And guess what I did? So we've been friends ever since. So a long, long time.
Not too hard a deal to have to work with there, I think.
Oh, absolutely not. Tom was a good one of those good farmers at that time.
Okay. Okay, so nothing to do with rugby. So so let's move on a little bit onto malting. So what is malting? Why do we need to go through the malting process to make whiskey?
Okay, so obviously a few weeks ago you saw how Tom grew the malting barley, and my job was to buy that at the time, and basically we're looking for a crop that is suitable for malting, and there are certain elements of the crop we analyse in terms of its nitrogen content and things like this. Fundamentally, I won't go into too much detail or technical stuff, but the more nitrogen there is in the grain, there's a reduced amount of effectively fermentable sugars. So we're looking for low nitrogen barley. The area that we're in and the farm is on is perfect for that. So I would buy that and we would sell that on to a malting factory. Nowadays, obviously, we just send our own. So we send that down there, and effectively what the maltster does for us, he forces that grain into growing again effectively, and what that does, it releases fermentable sugars out of the grain, and that's part of the steeping process or the wetting of the barley process, and he then stops that process and starts to kiln it or dry it, and how long and what type of drying he uses will create different flavor profiles when we actually use that in beer or whiskey. So that's the basis of sending your barley off to being malted. It just releases those fermentable sugars for us to use in the next sort of process.
Okay, and so lots of distilleries at the moment talk about floor malting versus kind of normal malting. So what are the differences between those things?
Yeah, I mean, floor malting is very traditional. It's very very hands-on, and effectively what you're doing is laying out that the barley onto a floor. It's around about a foot deep, and you have to manually move that with a rake as it starts to germinate. The malting factories we have around us are not now floor malted. They're into quite large production. But one thing that does give is consistency. So when we send our 200 tons of barley down to Muntons, who are our partner in this, we know we're going to get back a very uniform, well malted product to actually use in the whiskey and the beer.
So just a quick picture of what that looks like at the maltsters there. So that's a handful of grain. It's just, you can't quite see it probably on the screen, but it's just starting to germinate, and it's just starting to turn and get to the right kind of state that we need it for.
That's right.
So we've had our first question,
Okay.
which is it viable for Spirit of Yorkshire to do its own malting?
Viable. I think it would be nice to do, but it's an awful lot of work, and whether that actually adds anything to the end product is probably debatable. I mean, guys who are obviously floor malting would argue that it does, but at the end of the day, you know, what we're trying to do is produce something that is uniform, and I would suggest at this point in time it'd be a lot of hard work, particularly when we've got a malting factory literally down the road from us. So at the moment, probably not, Paul, but great question.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing, is that it would be a really nice part of our story is to be able to say that we do literally everything on site, like some of the Scottish distilleries do. I know Kilhoman up on Islay can do that too, but it's a really, so because of the brewery and the farm, we already had an exceptionally strong relationship with the local maltsters, Muntons, and so we can definitively say that what we send definitely comes back and is all our own barley. And actually, it's really nice when you go and look at it, and they've got kind of little things earmarked on their notice board, and it's a sort of /Tumbleby Grange, and you know, we can tell exactly what's coming back there, and it just means that we're working with experts who can do it exceptionally well. And I think that's a really important part of the process.
And I think people as well who do floor malt, distillers do floor malt, probably don't produce 100% of their own malted barley. They'll have to buy some in as well. So it's a bit of a mix and match, but it's certainly nice to do a proportion of that if you could on the premises.
Yeah, the next stage for the expansion. But
Maybe.
We'll see. I don't think we need that at the moment. So then where does peating come from? Because I think lots of people will know about peated whiskey, but actually malting is a crucial part of that peated creation process.
Yeah, it's one of these myths that the peatedness of a whiskey comes from the water. It's actually nothing to do with the water at all. It's all to do with that malting process. So when I talked about the kilning or the drying of the malt in the latter stages of the production, what they do is they actually feed peat smoke into that process as part of the drying process, and it gives an element of phenols into the actual malt. You can actually then specify how peated your barley is when you source it. So if you're looking at some of the Islay whiskies, they're heavily peated. They've got a lot of parts per million of phenols, right down to just putting a small incorporation, if you like, into your normal production, which gives a lighter sort of element. So yeah, it's all to do with that kilning process at the end of the malting business. Yeah.
Okay, so then we've malted the whiskey. Oh, hang on, actually, I think maybe is it just malting barley that can be malted, or are there other types of other things that can be malted?
Well, there's lots of things you can malt. In fact, and I'll give you a little bit of a heads up here, that we've actually taken a field of rye down to the malting factory as well, and that's been malted for us. So you can certainly malt other grains without question. You can also, not for us because we're a single malt producer, but other grain whiskies, you don't have to have the grains malted. So you can just put straight grains into the mash, but it's that would not be a single malt whiskey. That would be more of a blend or a grain whiskey. So you don't have to malt it, but it just adds flavor profiles. It adds more sugar, get more yield in terms of alcohol from it, and it's just more flavoursome if you do that process.
Okay, so then now you've malted it. What happens to it once it's been malted?
Okay, so in our business, that malt comes back to us in one big lump again. So out of say 100 tons, we actually get back a quarter less than that. So we're not actually getting a whole quantity back. So for every ton of barley we send down there, or a ton and a quarter we have to send down there to get a ton of malt back. So we do have an element of loss in that. So that comes back to us and it's stored at the brewery, and we pull from that stock, if you like, and the first process is basically grinding it up into a grist. At this point, I mean, I don't know if you can see this, but that's not ground at all. That's straight barley or malt, if you like, coming back from the maltsters. And what we do is we actually grind that into a grist. So this is more not like a flour, but like a coarse flour. If we produced a flour, that would actually start to block a lot of the production processes, and it would get stuck in the mash tun. So if you like, it's a coarse grind, and that depends how big the grain is to start with, how we set the actual rollers. But it's a very important process to get absolutely right to give us as much surface area to allow the water to start to draw those sugars out. So the first process really is grinding into a grist. We then put that into the mash tun, which is a big 1 ton mash tun, and we start the process of steeping. And all that is putting in hot water around about 65 degrees into the mash tun. And we do that for around about 20 minutes to let that water start to soak into the barley or the malt, and allows the enzymes to start to pull out those sugary short chain molecules that we need for fermentation, the next process.
Okay, and so lots of this, well, for us, this is when having a brewery on site is exceptionally useful, because this first part of the distillation process and the creation of whiskey is actually the same as the first part of the creation of beer. There's a couple of slight tweaks, but really you need the kind of the brewery equipment to do it. So that's part of the reason why the distillery was a really viable option and a really exciting prospect early on, is because we had the barley, we had the water supply, and actually we had the brewery all set up. So it was one less thing to have to invest in when creating this this distillery.
Yeah, and I think, Jenny, it's probably good to say that that process is the hardest thing to get right. You know, in terms of distilling, generally speaking, I think that's relatively straightforward. But a lot can go wrong with the mashing and the fermenting, which we'll go on to talk a bit more in depth about in a minute. But yeah, if you don't produce a good wash, which is the base product for distillation, you're never going to make a great whiskey. So that experience over the last 16 years has been absolutely vital to us getting to a point that we've got now with superb sort of whiskey coming out of the barrels.
There you go. So that's a hats off to Alex and the brewing team at Waldtop Brewery.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned, so we've talked about milling, we've talked about mashing, so we need to talk about fermentation now, fermenting, the next stage of that process.
Yeah, so when we start that process of drawing off what we call now the worts, it's very important that we have a clear wort. So we recirculate the wort to clarify it, if you like. The more sort of impurities we have in there, the more effect it has on flavour. So we're trying to make as clear a wort as possible. That will then come off and go into a washback, which is a large tank holding around about 10,000 litres. So that gets filled up, and this is when we pitch in the yeast. There's a lot of temperature involved as well, which I won't go into great detail about now, but we've got to monitor temperature all the way through this process. If we're too hot, it will kill yeast, it will kill the process. So we've got to actually monitor that very, very closely. And then we pitch in our yeast. We use two types of yeast. These drive different flavour profiles into the wash and then into the spirit. So again, the selection of the yeast strains you use are fundamental. Alex at the brewery would call them quite aggressive yeast strains. So they really want and are very hungry for that sugar, and they will make as much alcohol as they possibly can in a relatively short period of time. So typically 75 hours, you've got something attenuating up to an 8% wash. With beer production, that would probably take you, I don't know, 150 hours. It would take an awful lot longer because the yeast strains are not as aggressive. They're not sort of as hungry, if you like, for the sugar, but they're driving different flavors as well. So the choice of yeast strains and monitoring that process is vital to keep giving us a head start down at the distillery. Okay.
And so then once we've got that, then that's the wash. Is that right?
Yeah, I've got a little bottle here. It doesn't probably look great on screen, but there you go. And it doesn't probably look like beer either. Obviously, it's not been filtered. It's just purely a solution of alcohol with loads of flavour in there, generated from the malting of the barley and the fermentation process and the yeast strains we use. So this is the base product we put into the stills. As I say, it's called wash, and it stands at around about 8% ABV. And if this isn't right, as I said earlier, we'll never make a great whiskey. So this is fundamental to the next process.
Great. So we've got the wash. Now it needs to start distilling. So how do we get it to the distillery?
Yeah, well, we've got a tanker which comes down on a Monday and a Thursday, and it brings 10,000 litres with it. So that 10,000 litres we split between distilling on a Monday and a Tuesday, and then a Thursday and a Friday. So at the moment we're distilling 4 days a week. Hopefully, as things move on, our plan is to extend that to 6 days a week. And we've got the capacity to do that. It's just a case really of making sure that we've got the wherewithal to do it. So we'll be moving along those lines in the next 6 to 9 months, I hope. So producing even more whiskey.
Great. And so just trying to think of anything else. And if anyone else has any questions as well, then do please put them up. So we've had one more question onto the comment section. So this is about will the malted rye go into a rye wash, or will it so single rye, or would it be a mix of rye and barley? How do you think we'll balance that? without
Yeah,
giving.
well, yeah, it's basically you wouldn't use 100% rye. A rye is a very, very tricky thing. We're going back now to thinking about mashing. If you used 100% rye in the mash tun, it would basically set like porridge. Now, the way around in the States, they're allowed to, and other countries, they're allowed to use artificial enzymes to break that down. That's not something we would ever do, and that's not something actually we can do in the UK. So the natural enzymes come from the barley. So we need those, and that breaks down the sort of solid porridgey type consistency of the rye. And so to be called rye whiskey, it needs to be 51% minimum rye, but the rest of it will be malting barley. And that will give us that fluid production that will allow us hopefully not to get stuck in the fermenter. Sorry, the mash tun. One of the things we also got to watch is rye tends to foam very aggressively when you pitch the yeast in. It produces an awful lot of carbon dioxide, so we've got to watch that too. So it'll be a big learning curve, but one that we can label as a certain filter bottle because we've grown the rye, and it's one we're very excited about because it'll give us another string to our bow.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one coming up, and especially just from thinking about the kind of the distillery and the portfolio and the bottles that we're bringing out, and making sure that we've got a balance and an interesting selection of whiskies to keep you guys as interested as possible. We're really, really excited by that, and it was quite fun watching it come out of the fields and get planted, and kind of all of the and then actually we got some footage of it being put into the lorry to go down to Muntons the other day, which was really quite exciting actually.
Yeah. No, it's an exciting project. Obviously, a few years away in terms of it being in a bottle, but yeah, it's certainly exciting. And the other thing you tend to do as well is you tend to use new oak barrels to mature rather than used oak barrels. So again, it's a slight change in production techniques, but you need that new oak activity to balance off the rye flavour. So that'll be interesting as well.
Yeah, that will, because that's totally different from how we're doing things at the moment. So if there's any more questions or you've got anything else, then do please bob them into the comments box just below this. We'll keep chatting for a little time just to make sure that if there's anything, we're not missing any questions. And then we shall wrap it up, but not before we do some important plugs, which always come in well here. So first up is, as ever, the newsletter. If you'd like to stay abreast of everything that we're doing, every month we send a newsletter. It's very full of news. It's actually the kind of newsletter that you can sit down and read with a cup of tea or a glass of whiskey, depending what you fancy and what time of day it is. But we really try to put as much information in there as possible so that you really get a sense of what we're up to here at the distillery. Then the other thing to talk about is that we've got a special offer at the moment, which is that if you buy 2 bottles of whiskey via our website, then you'll get a complimentary tour voucher for 2 people for when we're back safely open again. So we're really looking forward to having people down at the distillery. I think Dave and Nicola are finding it very lonely down there on their own, sort of in just 2 people in this massive space. So we're looking forward to getting visitors back to the distillery again. And we'll be doing that. So actually, I can just see there's a couple more questions coming in. So one is from Paul asking about Virgin Yorkshire Oak, which again,
yeah, watch this space. We do have plans for that, but at the moment we're well, that's probably for another sort of session on live. But yeah, we are definitely planning something for that.
I'll tell you what, making wood and casks and felling trees and things makes whiskey look like a quick process. It really does when it comes to drying out stuff. So there's definitely things in place for that, but I'm afraid we might not be talking about them for a bit of a long time. And then one more question, which is about, with Muntons investing in a peating plant, will we be creating a peated whiskey? It's a very interesting question indeed.
Again, yes. I mean, we were lucky enough to go down there to see the opening of the peating plant. It is extremely impressive. They haven't cut any corners there whatsoever. It's really going to make some great peat. We would like to think as well, if we can get some Yorkshire peat, that'd be even better. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that having a peated bottling on your portfolio is something that would really excite us, and I think would excite people who clearly are into the peated whiskies. And if we can peat our own, that'd be absolutely superb. We do have a few peated casks maturing, snuggling away somewhere in the warehouse. So that would probably form the first bottling, but in the future, I'm sure we'll do something with peat and with Muntons down the road. Yeah.
And so, just for those asking what the difference between a peated cask is and actually peated whiskey.
Yeah. So the other way around, if you didn't want to peat your own barley and put it through your stills, is to take a cask that's had peated whiskey in it. So usually they're Islay based, Lagavulin, sort of Kalila, Kilhoman. So those sorts of casks can be used to put our spirit in, and it picks up those phenol sort of characteristics, if you like, albeit sort of not as peated as the first sort of fill, but certainly it picks up the elements of peat. So that's if you like, a way around, and quite a few of the newer distilleries have done that. So a lot of peated stock that's out there will be produced in that way. There isn't many who take peated barley and produce it themselves. They're either peated or they're not, but that's a quick way around, I suppose, of doing it. Yeah.
So that would be a peated finish. So
yeah, you'd probably, well, it's not really finished because you'd put new make spirit straight into a peated cask. Yeah. So it would be long term, but it's not really a finish as such.
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so then last question that's come up, unless anybody else would like to drop any in, is would we ever do a full tour literally from the field to the bottle?
I think that's an absolutely sensational idea. Yes. I think that'd be great. I think a whole day. I mean, we do distilling days, and I suppose in some ways you do get onto the farm, you do see the brewing and the mashing in, you get involved with that. So we did, and we will be doing again. But yeah, I mean, the actual field walking, seeing the crops growing, that is something that I obviously I hail from, and I find very, very interesting. And certainly with what we're doing in terms of the new methods of growing the barley and minimal cultivation, that's quite an exciting process that we're going through, and it's a learning curve for us, but I think it's something we need to do to make sure that we're looking after the soil, and it's a whole new subject, if you like, or a huge subject, and Tom and the team on the farm are really excited about that process. So I think we can involve people up at the farm doing that at some stage.
Yeah, that would be great. And another quick plug, which is that we do also do joint brewery tours, joint tours with the brewery. So every Tuesday in normal circumstances, you can book onto a joint tour. So you do a tour up at the brewery first, and then you come down and finish off at the distillery. So it's not quite the full field to bottle process, but in one day, you definitely get a very full picture of how the two companies work together and how the farm plays an integral part in that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one more question still. So will the peated be pot rather than column still? We're getting into detail.
Well, yeah, that's quite detailed. At this time, it's a distance away. I couldn't really comment on that at the moment. I think what you tend to get with peated whiskies is they tend to be pot based. So it's probably the more oilier type of spirit would complement the peated flavours better. So I'm thinking off the top of my head here, but I would probably go towards a pot-based distillate for that. I think the lighter sort of based distillate would probably get lost with the peat element. So I'll have to ask Joe that one, but certainly that's my initial thoughts.
Okay, super. Right. Well, I think that's just about everything, and we're bang on 29 to 30 minutes there. So well done us for hitting our time.
It's the first time we've done that, I think.
Okay, so it's great. And I feel like you probably, with a 5:30 start, could do with heading off home now. Definitely.
I think you're probably right. I've enjoyed it though. I love doing these things, and I hope you guys are enjoying what we're doing, the content we're putting in there. And I think if there's anything you would like to hear about or we haven't even thought about, then please comment and ask us, and we'll try and incorporate that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we're still doing things like behind the scenes videos and lots of other stuff. So if there's anything that you'd like to see, just drop us a direct message on Facebook or an email to info@spiritofyorkshire.com. And we'll try and weave that into all the content that we're making, because it's just really important. And it helps us to know that we're making stuff that people actually want to watch and want to hear about too.
Yeah, we don't want to be talking between ourselves, only Joe.
No, we talk enough rubbish between ourselves. So that's fine. Okie doke. Right, I think that's everything then. So so without further ado, we'll say cheers and good night, and that we'll see you this time, same place next week.
Yeah, thanks guys. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Bye.